All right, so let's get started. First thing I want to do is acknowledge the team of folks who made this project and subsequent report possible. Chris Meyer is the executive director of LEAP, and he was both the initiator and the lead for this project. Caetano de Campos Lopez is the director of climate policy for C3. He was our lead in data analysis and the author of our report, which is published today, and we'll place that link in the chat at the end. Wilson Ratliff is LEAP's technical director, and he made sure that the equipment upgrades were properly installed, managing a team of private contractors to complete the electrification of 8 homes. Terry Kent is C3's director of programs and communications. She was the primary point of contact for our participating families. She worked with them to collect their energy bills, learn their stories, and was the author of the family profile section of our report. None of this would have been possible without their incredible work. I know I speak for many of us when I say that we are grateful for their climate leadership. Now that we've met everyone, the next step will be to give you an overview of our project, dig into the lessons learned. We'll give you a brief virtual tour of a couple of households, go over the LEAP's new electrification policy that they'll be sharing with us today, and of course, leave lots of time for Q&A. C3 works across all sectors of the community to understand the barriers to climate solution, assist individuals in taking action, and recommending policy change needed to reach our goals. Our 2020 Uncovering Energy and Equity report revealed the high levels of energy burden among low-income households in our community. LEAP works directly with many of those households that were identified in our report to improve energy efficiency and reduce costs. While electrification is a well-known climate solution, we knew that understanding the barriers to implementing it in low-income households was critical to ensure that it is a climate solution that's available to everyone. Thus, our residential electrification project and our partnership with LEAP was born. LEAP secured enough funding to fully electrify 8 households in Charlottesville and Albemarle County. We began identifying and working with the families to collect data in late 2019. Installations were completed in the fall of 2020, and we circled back to our participating families this past spring for another round of data collection and to hear how they were feeling about the improvements. Our families were awesome to work with. We loved hearing about how their new systems were working for them. 5 of our families were based in Albemarle County, and 3 live in the city of Charlottesville. 4 of our households were using natural gas, 3 were using fuel oil, and 1 was using kerosene. Each home received a new efficient heat pump HVAC system, and several received heat pump hot water heaters. The team replaced 1 gas range and 1 gas clothes dryer during the project. We collected energy bills from January through March of 2020 and January through March of 2021 to compare the impact of the new systems on overall energy consumption, energy costs, and greenhouse gas emissions. It's worth mentioning here that the sample size of our homes was small, and we only measured 3 months of the year, and those months were impacted significantly by a colder winter in 2021 and more time at home due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Each participant also received a slightly different mix of upgrades in their home. To share our findings in more detail, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Caetano de Campos Lopez, C3's Director of Climate Policy and the author of the report. Kai?
Hi, thank you, Susan. Thank you all for joining us today. Can you hear me well? Yes, awesome. So I would just like to highlight some of the things that Susan just mentioned a few moments ago. One is the Energy Inequity Report we conducted and released last year. In that report, we identified that 22% of the Charlottesville population have an energy burden of 10% or more of their income, what means that they are allocating 10% or more of their household income towards energy costs, and that's a very high number. More impressively, we found that a couple of neighborhoods in our area, actually a couple of census tracts, had energy burden of 50% or more. Sorry, more than 50% of the population in these census tracts had an energy burden of 10% or more. So anyways, it's a very important share of the population on these neighborhoods. And we were looking for solutions that would combine a climate solution with affordable housing, affordable energy consumption solutions for these households. And as she mentioned, with a little bit more of detail, I would like to say that on average, first quarter of this year was 4.3 degrees Fahrenheit colder than last year's winter, which affected somehow the energy consumption of these households. COVID pandemic also had an impact. A few households saw their household size increase as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, with some of their children coming back from college to live with them again during this period instead of living away, like in the baseline year, and that also affected consumption and more time at home, right? With homeschooling, home office practice, people were spending more time cooking and using their device at home. So yeah, just kind of highlighting this difference in the baseline. All right, now talking about the overall performance of our pilot. Here we can see three main ways of measuring energy. Energy as a physical feature, in this case, million BTU, which is British thermal unit. It's a way of comparing, for example, the energy power of electricity with natural gas and fuel oil and etc. Monetary values in dollar and pounds of CO2 equivalent, carbon dioxide equivalent, or greenhouse gases. One interesting definition is that beneficial electrification, as defined by ACEEE, the American Council for Energy Efficiency Economy, is that whenever you have a project of electrification that can provide a lower energy consumption in BTU, lower expenditure in dollars, lower emissions in greenhouse gases, then this electrification project can be considered beneficial electrification. Overall, our pilot achieved that. I should just say that our pilot electrification with these 8 households also included some level of insulation, other energy efficiency measures that also helped results being improved. But this could be considered a beneficial electrification overall. Talking about energy initially, we can see that all households saw their energy consumption decrease. On average, we were talking about a decrease. Sorry, Terry, do you mind coming back to the previous slide? Sorry about that. I just want to say here we can see that the orange bars, or they're talking about what was the previous consumption level, right? 100%. And the blue ones are talking about what's the post pilot. And we can see that energy consumption reduced by 56%. And in terms of energy, in terms of dollars, it was about 26%. In terms of emissions, it was about 39%. But let's keep in mind right now this number of 56% reduction in energy consumption. Okay, next slide, please. We can see that the performance was better in terms of energy consumption for all households, with the average being displayed in the last couple bars. but we can see that some households had much better performance than others. And these households were clearly the households that were consuming heating oil before. On average, as I just said, the performance was 56% better, but for heating oil, households that had heating oil systems, the improvement was between 63 and 73% reduction in their energy consumption. Okay, next slide. Okay, here I'm just going to be trying to make a differentiation between what was Q1 performance, which that's what we have been talking so far, Q1 2020 versus Q1 2021, which is pretty much the winter months, and that's why the data we said before about the weather difference is so important. And it led to a 56% reduction in energy consumption. Next bullet. But when we project these savings to an year-round savings, for doing that, we use some data that Charlotte Gas provided us a couple of years back. The year-round savings, the year-round consumption of natural gas. The Q1 consumption of natural gas is equivalent to 47% of the year-round consumption of natural gas. What means that the majority of the consumption happens in the first quarter of the year, and the rest of the year you have some consumption, but it's smaller on a proportional basis. So when projecting the savings of Q1 towards the entire year, acknowledge that right now households are fully consuming electricity instead of fossil fuel, we were able to estimate that the savings that were 56% decrease on their bills for Q1 versus Q1 now are going to be somewhere around 37% for the full year. That's a number that only considers heating usage. So I'm just talking about the natural gas that's not going to be consumed anymore. But our improvements already, we had some indications that the improvements we made for the electrification were also benefiting households from a cooling perspective as well. Although we do not have data for that, and it's not being considered in this 37% number. All right, here we're talking about overall energy savings in terms of dollars. The average, and just as a reminder, was 27%. And again, we can see that performance was different among households. The majority of the households saw savings in terms of the energy consumption, with average of being 27% reduction, and heating oil participants reducing their energy expenditures between 49% and 64%. But we saw some households that did not have a performance as good. For example, we have a terrell household which observed a small increase in the energy expenditure of this household. But at the same time, we know that this household did not have a system that before covered their entire home. So heating oil systems, sometimes they can be very focused in certain rooms and certain areas of the home. Terrell household had a system that 1/3 of the home more or less was not being covered, and right now it's peace. So again, these difference, it's a little bit tricky because we're not comparing apples with apples. The weather was different, COVID pandemic was different, and in this case, covered area was different. So it's a little bit, we have to take this information with lots of caution. Okay, now talking about the net present value of the project, when considering the overall monetary savings of all the 8 households over the next 20 years, the lifespan of the equipment that they received, we expect that they are going to receive $32,000 of overall savings among the 8 of them. On average, this is a saving of $4,000 in operational costs. This number, I believe, is one of the key highlights that we should take into consideration, that when considering different technologies for HVAC systems and etc., when comparing fuel oil, natural gas, or electricity, we must remember that there is an expected savings over the lifespan of the project of around the lifespan of the equipment of around $4,000 per household. And this number is definitely better for heat and oil participants. Yes, and then for the energy bills, again, for the same reason that I mentioned before, although we saw a 27% decrease on average for the energy bills Q1 versus Q1, when we make the same projection for the year-round savings, the average savings that we can expect is around 18% for the households of our pilot. Yes, next slide. All right, now in terms of emissions, performance was better than the monetary aspect. Again, for the same reasons as before, it's a little bit tricky for some households that had, we were not able to compare apples with apples, but again, we were able to see that on average, emissions reduced by 39%. All but 2 households saw their emissions being reduced. And in the for heat and oil participants, emissions were reduced between 56 and 68%. Important thing to observe here is that our grid has been consistently getting cleaner and cleaner over the last few years. This is a process called decarbonization of the grid. However, because of lack of more recent information, we had to use for estimating Q1 2020 and Q1 2021 information from 2019. So we were not able to capture, for example, enhancements in the grid between 2020 and 2021. So again, here, this comparison might be better than what we are seeing here if the grid actually improved between 2020 and 2021. And that's even expected to be, this comparison is even expected to be better and better over the years as the grid gets cleaner. And this last slide, I would just like to talk a little bit about, yes, all right, I was just talking about that the improve over year-round, it's going to be around 26% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And when talking about Q1 versus Q1, the performance was 39% better. So again, as always, when we are comparing Q1 versus Q1, the performance is better than comparing year-round because heating, fossil fuel energy consumption usually is dedicated for heating purposes. Winter is Q1 and winter months are the months that we see most usage of fossil fuel source of energy. And all right, and as I just mentioned before, for heating oil participants, the performance was better between 56% and 68% reduction. Lastly, finally, by 2045, the Virginia Clean Economy Act, the Renewable Portfolio Standards included in the legislation, it states that 100% of the electricity that serves Charlottesville and well, the majority of Albemarle is going to be coming from renewables by 2045. So we can expect that by 2041, next bullet, when combining all the decrease in energy consumption that we observed already between between 2020 and 2021, plus projecting all the reductions in the emission factor of the grid, so the decarbonization of the grid, we can expect that by 2041, the last year that these households are going to be using these equipment, the emissions are going to be 95% smaller than the equivalent emissions from similar equipment using fossil fuel or heating oil. On average, overall, we expect that over the next 20 years, over 2 million pounds of CO2 equivalent are going to be avoided, avoided emissions that's equivalent to more or less 130, the emissions of 130 households throughout 1 year. So yeah, lots of emissions being reduced there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. I just want to let you know that if you have any questions about any of that or anything occurred to you, please feel free to put it in the chat. Our team is keeping track of questions and we'll do our best to answer them all at once at the end of the presentation. Now I want to turn it over to Wilson Ratliff, LEAP's technical director, and he's going to share the video tour of 2 of our participating homes. Wilson?
Thanks, Susan, and hi, everybody. Just to tee up this first home, this is the Terrell residence. They sort of first entered or came on our radar back in 2016 when we did some insulation work through one of our funding sources for them. So we did a lot of insulation, air sealing, and then since then they've always sort of been on our radar. So we did some minor repairs in between here and then. But then when we had this opportunity to run them through this program, I called them up and they were very much interested in it. I'll get into some of the details during this video here, but I saw some comments in the chat about people noticing that in some of these homes, their energy costs actually went up before and after. The Terrell household is one of those homes. They actually had a bedroom addition off the back that wasn't really part of the square footage that was being intentionally heated through their existing floor furnace. It was just kind of counting on the heat just to kind of drift back there on its own. And we put a designated heating system in it. So their effective square footage went up. So that's part of that, but we'll get into some of that during the video. Well, let's go.
10th and Page neighborhood at one of the homes that we involved in the fuel switching project. This family actually were on our 3rd round of upgrades. We've been working with them on various projects since about 2016. Previously, we did attic insulation, a bunch of air sealing, some extensive ground cover improvements in this crawl space, as well as some other indoor air quality improvements. We're going to take you inside now and kind of get into the details of what we did out here. So this house originally had a natural gas floor furnace that you can see the original grate down here. It was original to the house, so late 1940s. That was heating the entire house. And the way those work is it just creates the heat, it drifts up into the space, and then just relies on natural convection to get throughout the rest of the house, both the 2nd story and the back addition. What we did instead is replace it with these ductless mini split systems. Those are heat pump technology. They can get down into the teens on heat pump mode, and then it's electric auxiliary heat. We have 3 of those in the house now, serving this kitchen or this living room and kitchen area, one for the back bedroom and then another one upstairs. And that does both heat and air conditioning at much higher efficiencies than a ducted system would be. The original oven and range here was natural gas also and had been broken for about 4 or 5 years. What we did is just replace it with a pretty straightforward electric oven and stove. So we're now down here in the cellar basement of the home. This is the hybrid water heater that we installed. Originally, there was a natural draft gas water heater here that sat about this high, and then it had a flue pipe that came up and then exited through the chimney in the back here. It never, as far as I've been involved in this project, it had never really drafted properly. So there's always this risk of a health and safety issue imminent. And it was also quite old. So this was an easy decision to make to replace it with this hybrid water heater. The cost of operation is about half what the natural gas would have been. All we had to do was upgrade the electrical panel to accommodate it as well as the other upgrades that we did upstairs. The way these work is this is a normal storage tank like you have on any water heater from about here down. This portion is a heat pump, not unlike one that we use to heat our homes. But it pulls air from the room, transfers that into the water, and dumps colder air into the space. By doing that, it's also dehumidifying the space. So the homeowners already made a comment today when I was talking to them about how they've noticed it's much drier down here. They don't have cave crickets hopping around like they used to. So there is an indoor air quality component to it as well, if it's installed correctly and in the right space. Condensate comes out of the back, gets drained into a sump pump over in the corner there. And what makes these more efficient is that they're not actually combusting a fuel to heat that water or expending energy to heat a heating element like an electric water heater does. What they do, they're just moving heat from one space into another. So they operate about 3 times the efficiency of a standard electric tank, which is already at 100% efficiency by its nature. And a gas storage water heater, by comparison, is only about 80% efficient. So it's worth noting, we're here at the back of the house now, that this square footage right here was a bedroom addition, still early to the construction, but not original to the floor plan. And none of that originally had any real heat or air conditioning being delivered to it. So the mini split improvements that we did now provides consistent heating and cooling to this space, and they can get it to whatever temperature they want, rather than just counting on the floor furnace to kind of let the heat drift back there, or using space heaters like they were sometimes.
It's efficient and it's comfortable. It's very comfortable, not like as 4-unit, but in the winter would just originate all the heat in one room, and hopefully it would find its way to other areas.
Yeah.
You know, this has just like a rotating movement to the point where everything is comfortable.
Nice.
Everything is comfortable, not just in the winter, but now that we found how hot and humid the summer has been, it's serving the same purpose, and we're enjoying it just as much. And we're worry-free, basically.
Great.
Worry-free.
Glad to hear it.
Yes.
Oh, it's gonna, thought I had fixed this issue with switching over to YouTube, but not so much on that one. All right, let's see if we can get back to the videos. Okay, Wilson, I think this is the second one, if you want to cue it up.
Yes, so this is the Sammy household. I was unable to be in person during this one, so Terry is our tour guide today. But similar, the less involved sort of scope of work. Had an existing gas furnace that we replaced with the heat pump, and he already had an electric water heater that was older and failing, so we just replaced that with a heat pump water heater.
So we are here at Sammy's Household, and this is in the Fry Springs neighborhood. And at this home, Leap started working with them early before this project on adding adequate insulation. But for this project, we looked at converting a natural gas furnace to heat pump and also an electric water heater. So we're going to go ahead and go inside and show you what that looks like. So here we are in the basement, and this is the new heat pump system. It's an 18 SEER. Again, this home was built in the 70s, so the system was very old. It was a natural gas system. And over here we have the hybrid heat pump water heater. And this was switched out for an electric model that wasn't working properly. And so this rounded out the project very nicely.
So the new system is actually great. It's for me, it's very surprising. Saved a lot of money, really. I mean, I'm talking real about that saving. So I want to say a lot about that, but I don't know, like they did a great job.
All right. Get back to it. All right. Okay. Thank you, Wilson. So we're almost done with the presentation part, and we'll get to questions really soon here. I just want to take a moment to share some of the big lessons that our 2 teams learned through this project. The first one really is that program flexibility is key when upgrading low-income homes to electric. Some participants required electrical upgrades and removal and remediation of fuel oil tanks. That is important to consideration for both state and local policymaking. Homes with fuel oil who switched to electric saw significant improvements in energy costs, reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Making electrification available to these families as a solution is going to be really important going forward. The climate benefits of the project were overwhelmingly positive. That is something that is really clear to all of us in the project. It's critical to pair electrification with air sealing, insulation, and other energy efficiency measures to maximize cost saving. And LEAP does that so well. While results in the homes with natural gas varied widely, we do believe that local and state policy can be designed to ensure that electrification is a solution that works for everyone. And quite frankly, we must. Reducing residential emissions is critical to reaching our emission reduction goals, but we need to make sure, and what this project tells us is that we need to make sure that it's a solution that really does work for everyone, and that can be done through smart policy design. And I look forward to having those discussions in the coming months with many of you. So I'm going to introduce Chris, who's just going to really quickly touch on LEAP's policy response as a result of this project.
Thank you, Susan. Advance the slide. Lessons from this pilot just covered: inform the development, and just go to the 5 points here, I think. Development of our electrification policy, which you're seeing here now. We were going to be utilizing, obviously, this policy with all the clients that we serve, especially the low-income ones. Thus, for our organization going forward, and Susan, I think you need to click to get to the, there you go, next. We'll utilize these summarized points, which include, again, ensuring the health and safety of our clients, especially when encountering the current or future combustion of fossil fuels in their homes. Next. When desired, adding air conditioning through heat pumps for household resilience to extreme heat and other health considerations. Ensuring monthly energy bills are reduced in a comparable baseline or apples to apples situation. Considering long-term fuel and equipment costs when making our recommendations. And finally, prioritizing our allocation of resources, assisting low-income households with electrifications. That was not listed right there, but you can, my colleague Erin or Claire, or there it is, there you go. We'll be dropping a link in the chat where you can find this policy that we have and a little bit more details. I want to thank the donors for making this possible and again, allowing us to have those lessons learned and then develop this new policy that we look forward to implementing now. That's it, Susan, over to you.
All right, now it's time for us to answer your questions. And I assume Terry and Claire have been keeping some track in the chat. So Terry, I don't know if you want to unmute and give us some questions.
Yes, thank you, Susan, and thank you, everybody. So our first question comes from Jay Halbert. And are you going to continue to monitor the houses for 1 or 2 more years?
So I think we would certainly like to. If it's okay with the team, I'll take this one. We don't know the appetite for that with all of our families. We certainly want to follow the families to make sure that energy efficiency and electrification measures are continuing to save money or determine additional solutions if they're not saving money and if that's a challenge for families. So we want to make sure we stay in touch. Terry has done an exceptional job, and Wilson really, of building great relationships with these families. When we circled back with them in the spring, we found universal gratitude and just real happiness with the project. So we're going to do our best to keep in touch. I would love to have the full year of 2021. The main challenge is that we don't have a full year of energy data on the front end. So we'll be checking in and seeing how families are managing costs, but we don't necessarily have all the data to compare it to. And as we know, our energy utilities are not great at energy data access, even if you are the account holder. So we have struggled with that as an organization, even getting business older energy data. So we'll do our best to monitor, but we really do want to keep in touch with these families for many reasons.
Susan, this one's also just a good follow-up to that, and that is from Steve. Noticing that 2 of the residents' energy costs actually went up, how will you deal with this? And also on that note, how to ensure that the low-income families can maintain the heat pumps, as this is important to maintain efficiency and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I think a similar response to the first is that we really want to keep up with these families and keep track of costs going forward, find out how they're doing with the costs, whether they're getting cost savings. We'd love to know that. If their costs are increasing, we'd love to figure out how to help them. I really think, what we've got to do, we had so little data that we were comparing it to with such varying conditions, and also the colder winter and COVID pandemic and a number of other, the Terrell household not only had an expanded footprint, but also got a new appliance when their prior one wasn't functioning. So we saw that in many homes, but we do know that the cost savings were much more clear for the homes with fuel oil. So when we're thinking about policy, local, state policy, we really have to figure out what incentives or programs can be initiated to ensure that all of these families have access to this solution, and that it does reduce costs for all of the families. And that's something that C3 is very passionate about, making sure these policy solutions work for everyone. We're going to be putting our heads together on this in the coming months, and we invite you to reach out to us at policy@theclimatecollaborative.org if you want to be part of that conversation and brainstorming ways that we can make local and statewide policy work for electrification in all households.
And I'll add to that. Sorry, Susan, if you don't mind.
Fine.
Internally at LEAP, just with our existing funding and everything, we have enough flexible funds with this support from the city and county that if there are any maintenance issues that are outside of the warranty that come up on any of these homes, we can certainly support the homeowners if they don't have the means to take care of it themselves.
Other questions, Terry?
Susan,
And did you want to chime in?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say that one of the things to keep in mind here is that given the results that we saw, that as of right now, and it's very difficult to project what's going to happen with monetary costs over the next 20 years. Like in terms of greenhouse gases performance, we felt much more confident, especially with the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which allows us to have a great idea of the decarbonization that we're going to experience here in Virginia. But in terms of pricing, it's just very difficult to know what we're going to be dealing with. But we definitely saw this pilot as one of the things that emerged is that how can we combine electrification with other policies that are beneficial for climate and for lower income households, that in a way to achieve the full potential of electrification. For example, right now there's lots of discussion about community solar, shared solar going on at the state level, right? Where households that did not have a roof where they could place solar, or they did an HOA that they were not able to make that decision, they're going to be able to have access to solar energy by a production that's happening offsite, right, with shared solar or community solar. But a household that relies a great part of the energy consumption in non-electrical sources, they're not going to be able to fully exploit all the benefits of shared solar as a household that's fully electrified. So electrification combined, for example, with shared solar provided by either local governments or the state government or something like that, it's definitely something that we would love to explore moving forward. How can we combine electrification with other beneficial policies that can complement each other and provide the entire benefits that we're all talking here, so that lower incomes can feel really comfortable with all their benefits of the policy.
Thanks, Kai. So Joy from Harrisonburg asked, please discuss potential funding opportunities to make projects like this possible.
I'm going to hand that over to Chris.
Thanks, Joy. That's a great question. At least in the state of Virginia, we are lucky that the RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, allowance sales that the state participates in is 45% of that money is going to low-income energy efficiency. That is being administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Some of that 45% is already being allocated out to the Federal Weatherization Assistance Program, or the WAP program as it's known, and being used currently for deferrals and to expand basically access to that program. And that program is across the state, and not just, it's available to every household across the state, not just say if you're a Union customer or an Appalachian Power customer. We do have one hang up though, in that unfortunately the definition in the state code has energy efficiency program. That definition, which this RGGI money utilizes, says you have to have a reduction in electricity, not energy. And so we do need to fix there. Hopefully we'll see that in the upcoming General Assembly. That would then unlock, if not single millions of dollars, but $10 million, $20 million a year plus potentially to, again, finance some of this. Additionally, there is utility program money for under the Dominion program, the income age qualifying program. They say that is replacing equipment, but it similarly is hampered by that current definition of an energy efficiency program, and would need to be changed in order to allow that program to be utilized. What I think in general, what we've seen is, and then we talked about this in one of the lessons learned real quick, is when we have some flexibility and an assistance from some municipal programs, this can be hundreds to $1,000 to maybe pick up some things that aren't being covered, like the electricity upgrades that are needed in a lot of older low-income houses, with the utility program and maybe even the state program, and we call braiding them together. That is the best way to basically, I think, kind of address this and probably accelerate the implementation of them. So you need I would say an organizational partner, kind of someone equivalent to LEAP, who has access to multiple different sources of funding, ideally, where they can then kind of uniquely, just as each home needs its unique technical fix, it probably also needs this kind of unique funding fix, you might say, to make those things happen. I hope I answered your question.
Thanks so much. Also, we have a question from Barbara. How important are consumer instructions, in other words, settings for heat pump, water heater, mini splits, so that they can minimize energy consumption? I know, Wilson, you addressed it somewhat, but I did want to just throw it out to the group if someone wants to add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would stress, I'll let Wilson give the final answer, but that a lot of these residents have been living in unsafe and uncomfortable conditions for a long time. And so to imagine that folks are going to go in and put all settings, to the most, conservation oriented settings, is not really a reasonable expectation. I mean, some of the homes were heating with kerosene. I know LEAP has been in homes where people are heating their homes with open ovens. And so we're given these families as the ability to be comfortable. And that's a right that, we want all families in our community to be comfortable, to be able to mitigate the impacts of climate, to be able to protect themselves from the cold. But I do think there's an argument for a strong consumer focused, meet them where they are, training and the new equipment, and sort of following up with them on how it impacts their energy bills, and figure out how to support them in additional cost saving measures in their home. So all of our individual behaviors are certainly a factor in our energy costs, and just like it is in these houses. And so we, C3 is an organization that has been here to support households in learning those skills. I know LEAP has done a fair amount of follow-up with their homes as well.
Yep, I would agree with that. I think just the homeowner education component, I think is the biggest part of it. We don't really want to be in the position of mandating how people who receive our programs live in their homes, because ultimately the most important thing is that they're able to just live in their home comfortably. But helping people understand how their habits impact their utility bills, I think, can be very beneficial. If, when a homeowner realizes that, maybe moving their thermostat a single degree could make, 4% difference on their overall energy bill, for example, that might help inform where that set point sits, instead of them cranking it all the way down to 73, just to ice themselves out. Maybe they say, oh, maybe 76 or 78 is actually the way to go, and I can get used to it instead. That's the big part for me, is just making sure people can make informed choices about how they're living in their home, instead of just going into the whole thing dark without context.
I know this was a comment in the chat, but I did want to bring it up in case any of our speakers want to speak to it. And that was the heat pumps will lose 1.5% of refrigerants per year. So over a 20-year lifespan, there will be a need for maintenance. And, to look at a more full cycle solution. So did anyone, and not just focus on initial acquisition, did anyone want to respond to that before we get to the next question?
I'll take it. I'll just acknowledge it. I think it's a good point. It goes on. So a lot of this sort of maintenance issues that these homeowners are having to deal with are no different than any other homeowner has to deal with, or these homeowners had to deal with their previous systems for them. So like I said, a lot of them already had ducted air conditioners that are still dealing with that same sort of issue. I think that again falls into the homeowner education policy, so they know things to look out for, to be able to get a read on if their system's not working at peak efficiency or that sort of thing, and continued support on our end. We don't want to, a big part of this is creating appropriate solutions for the households. We don't want to just go in and throw in a system that we think is good for the box of the house without taking the homeowner's lifestyle into account. And I think that's where the follow-up from us and C3 comes into play there.
Great. And then while you were, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, okay. I just want to add that on purpose, we try to make the net present value estimations that we estimated very simple, because several elements are fairly difficult to include, but they were all important. The elements that Jeff mentioned definitely is relevant, but then we would also have to consider potential decrease in efficiency of fossil fuel equipment. Besides that, in some houses we found risks associated with the fossil fuel equipment that could lead to major monetary losses in case of a fire, monetary and health life-threatening losses, which are fairly difficult to assess in terms of monetary costs, and then the health benefits associated with the system that it's some. I would prefer not to place a value for that, but we can definitely place a value in the direction of health savings in terms of medication, the hospitalization, or etc. So every single cost that we would actually have to include when comparing the systems in a fair manner would be so difficult to include, and we are not prepared for making such huge estimations. Definitely, we recommend major organizations or the EPA or the EIA, Energy Information Agency of the United States, to perhaps conduct a study in that direction. But I think that overall health benefits are definitely in favor of the electrification, and future risks that some of them I'm not even including here, but as as households tend to move away from natural gas sources, perhaps the fixed costs of the systems are going to be distributed in a less diluted manner in the future, which is going to increase the natural gas bills overall. So it's difficult to make a fair statement because I don't know where natural gas costs are going to be 10 years from now. But given all these difficulties, I think that the final detail of the discussion is less relevant. I think we must capture the overall picture of savings on average being of near $4,000, and more detailed information would require different levels of study.
Gotcha. And I think this might be the last question. We're coming up on the top of the hour, but if the NPV is 4,000, what was the average equipment cost? Marcia asked, but one topic that's a new topic is whether on-bill financing would be a solution for some.
So maybe Wilson or Chris, I don't know if you can take the cost differential. And of course, all of these homes needed new equipment. So we weren't replacing, all the equipment was approaching the end of its life. But I'll let Wilson take that part, and then maybe Kai, you can talk about the on-bill financing piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think average cost for each home outside of the installation air sealing part just for the equipment was about $10,000 per house. Some homes needed electrical upgrades to be able to handle the new equipment, because obviously a heat pump requires a more electrical draw than a gas furnace, for example. That in those cases, that was another $2,500 or so. And then in the case of the electric range and the electric dryer, we had to run wires to those sites because they originally didn't have the appropriate electrical service also. In terms of, so I think that I guess the thing to keep in mind on this is I would never suggest to a homeowner that they just rip out their system and replace it with a heat pump unless they're at that point where their existing system is failing or needing to be replaced anyway. The cost to go from a normal air conditioner to a heat pump is only, I don't know, $600 or so. So that's really the time to do it. When you're already replacing your air conditioning, you're already spending that $6,000 to $8,000 or whatever it is. Spend a little more, then you can abandon your fossil fuel furnace entirely. Similarly, on the water heating side, the cost of a hybrid water heater is comparable to what would be like a high efficiency on demand water heater. So if you're going from standard efficiency gas to standard efficiency gas, they're about, it's a hard argument to make just based on the upfront cost. It's the time when you're actually replacing that water heater that you're already entertaining the idea of an upgrade. That's when these electric options are really enticing, and you see those benefits.
So Kai, do you want to, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's important to make a difference between market rate customers and clients and again, low income clients. Your low income clients are not going to have $8,000 to $10,000, $12,000, like Wilson said, to be able to obviously do an equipment replacement. So I think an on-bill financing scheme is something to be very, and Kai, if you want to dive into this, and Susan, if you want, I think we have time, but it's more for a market rate and very appropriate for a market rate client. But for your low income clients, you definitely need some kind of subsidy through a utility program or a state program that, again, pays for the majority of the equipment replacement and necessarily upgrades. Thanks.
Yeah, let Kai answer quickly, and then we'll
yeah.
wrap it up.
Thank you. All right. First, the topic of Ombu financing. It's a little bit tricky because usually Ombu financing is provided by the same utility that's going to provide you the equipment to reduce consumption on their own bill. So that will mean an electrical utility providing some energy efficiency improvements that would reduce electricity consumption, or a natural gas utility providing energy efficiency improvements that would reduce natural gas consumption, and then you would pay the improvements over time with the saving amounts. In the case that you're totally switching from one source to the other, it's a little bit tricky because it would be difficult to account for the savings in the electricity because you're switching from natural gas to electricity, or even from a provider in case of heating oil that you didn't even have a bill to begin with, was something that you would buy from time to time. So it definitely presents some challenges. I'm not familiar with Ombu financing for fuel switching. That's one point, but I definitely understand the perspective, and I agree with Neil's point that being able to financing these improvements over a longer period of time is key. We were able to see the $4,000 on average benefits in terms of fuel costs, and that's even more expressive for heating oil households. So when purchasing new equipment, if the differential between the equipment overall were below $4,000, you would feel attracted to actually make that purchase. But that would only happen if you can finance it over a long period of time and with low interest rates. So finding a mechanism that would allow these households to finance it over a 20 years period and with a very subsidized interest rate would definitely be key for helping them make that decision.
All right. Thank you so much. I think, we're at time and I don't want to keep anybody too long. If you want to reach out to our teams, the contact information is on your screen. I believe the link to our report has been loaded in the chat. The link to LEAP services has been loaded into the chat along with their new electrification policy. We really appreciate you all being here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to have completed this project. Thanks to the donors who supported it. Thanks to the great folks at LEAP and C3 who really made it happen. And it's an honor to work with these families. So I hope you all have a great afternoon.